Montana Territory, August 1881. The wind blew hard over the dry hills near Red Bluff, carrying dust and the scent of pine through the canyon where Evelyn Darden aimed her rifle at a rustle in the brush. Her heart beat steady, her stance firm. But it was not a wolf or cougar coming for her goats. It was a child barefoot, wide-eyed, maybe 10 years old, dragging his little sister by the hand. The girl could not have been older than 5, and both of them looked like they had not eaten in days. Evelyn lowered her rifle. "Where's your ma?" The boy, sunburned and shaking, stared at her chestnut braid before his lip quivered. "She left, said she'd be back. She never came." Evelyn's throat tightened. "How long ago?" The boy swallowed. "A week." She looked toward the sun. Then back at the tiny girl leaning against her brother's leg. "Come inside," she said, already turning toward the cabin. "You're safe now." She had been living alone since her father died 4 years ago, and she liked it that way. No one asking questions, no one expecting her to feel anything. But that night, as she put warm cornbread into the boy's hands and tucked a quilt around the girl, something cracked in her chest she had not felt in years. She learned their names slowly. The boy was named Tobias. The girl, Tessa. They had been living out of a wagon with their mother, a woman Evelyn never found. They stayed, and Evelyn let them. 2 weeks later, she rode to town for extra flour and medicine. She did not expect the man on horseback watching from outside the general store, the one with a battered hat, a jaw like carved stone, and gray eyes that saw more than they should. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am." Evelyn nodded once. "Sir." She meant to go inside and never look back. But he followed her in. "Name's Merritt McAllister," he said, standing near the shelf of nails. "I heard there's a woman out past the canyon raising 2 kids not her own. That true?" Evelyn stiffened. "Depends who's asking." "I work with the Stock Association. Was out looking for strays when I came across one of your goats tangled in wire. Thought I'd bring it back. Saw the boy digging a fence post. Good hand." Evelyn set the cornmeal down and looked him full in the face. "I do not need help." "I did not offer any," Merritt said evenly. "Just figured if I was riding by I could bring what you might need, in case you get tired of doing everything alone." Evelyn paid for her things and left without another word, but 2 days later he showed up again, on horseback, with a sack of flour and a quiet smile. "I said I did not need help," she said from the porch. "And I said I was just riding by," he answered, tying his horse near the post. "Your boy told me the girl's been coughing. I brought willow bark." Evelyn crossed her arms. "You think showing up like this is going to make me trust you?" He looked at her, steady and calm. "No, ma'am. I figure you don't trust anyone, but I hope you'll let me earn the right to try." She should have sent him away. But Tobias had already grabbed the packet of bark from his hand, and Tessa had leaned into Merritt's leg like she had known him forever. So Evelyn let him stay for supper. He came again the next week. Then the next. He fixed the barn gate, sharpened the tools, painted the rocking chair her father built when she was a girl. And every time he left, Evelyn felt something strange in her chest. It scared her. One evening, after a long day of fencing the south field, Merritt leaned against the porch rail, sweat at his collar, dirt on his hands. Evelyn brought him a tin of water. He took it, nodded his thanks, and looked out at the hills. "You ever think you might want more than this?" he asked quietly. She looked at him sharply. "I have all I need." "I did not mean more things," he said. "I meant more life, more joy, maybe even more love." Evelyn's face went cold. She stepped back. "I do not believe in love." Merritt's gaze met hers. "Then believe in me long enough to try." The words hit her like a thunderclap. She turned away, but he stepped forward. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low, "I know what it is to carry loss. To build walls so high nothing can reach you. I see it in you because it's in me too. but I also know what it is to want something real, something worth breaking for." She blinked hard, heart thudding. "I am not asking for forever today," he said. "Just a chance." She could not speak. Not yet. But she did not walk away. 2 weeks passed. Merritt kept showing up. Not asking for anything, just helping. Just being there. And Evelyn began to notice the small things, how Tobias smiled more when Merritt was near, how Tessa curled up beside him without fear, how Evelyn herself felt warmer when he was around. She started leaving the front gate unlatched. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast and hard. Evelyn was out in the woodshed when she heard shouting. She ran to the house and found Tobias at the door, soaked and breathless. "Tessa's gone." She followed the goat into the hills. Evelyn's knees nearly buckled. Which way? Up the ridge, toward the old mine. Merritt was already on his horse when Evelyn reached the yard. "Stay with Tobias," she shouted, mounting her own, but Merritt shook his head. "You are not going alone." They rode hard into the storm, the wind howling around them, trees bent. The rain lashed down. Evelyn's heart twisted as she called Tessa's name again and again, her voice breaking against the wind. Then they heard a faint cry. Merritt dismounted first. He climbed the ridge fast, Evelyn right behind. They found Tessa shivering on a ledge, her little arms wrapped around the goat's neck. Evelyn reached toward her, but the rocks crumbled under her boots. "I have her," Merritt said. He crawled forward, inch by inch, until he had the girl in his arms. Then he turned, gripping the rock, and slid back toward Evelyn. She reached for Tessa, clutching her tight, and Merritt pulled both of them to safety. Back at the cabin, after the storm had passed and the children were asleep, Evelyn stood on the porch, staring at the stars. Merritt came up beside her. "You all right?" She nodded once. "You saved her. You would have done the same." Evelyn looked up at him, something breaking open inside her. "You said to believe in you long enough to try." His eyes searched hers. "I am trying," she whispered. Merritt reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Then I will not stop showing you how." She did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into his chest, and Merritt McAllister wrapped his arms around her like he had been waiting his whole life to do it. The first frost dusted the high grass by late September. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke from the banked hearth and the sound of Merritt splitting wood outside. She sat up slowly, watching the pale light ease across the floorboards. Tessa's small form was curled at the foot of her bed, the quilt half kicked away. Tobias had taken to sleeping in the loft, saying he liked the view through the rafters. She tucked the quilt around Tessa again before pulling on her boots. Merritt had stripped off his coat, his shirt damp with sweat in the morning chill. He worked in silence, his motions clean and practiced. She leaned against the doorframe and watched, arms crossed, heart steady. "You could have waited," she said, voice still rough with sleep. He didn't look up. "I like the sound of the axe, feels honest." She stepped down onto the frosted grass. "You always up before the sun?" "Since I was 12, he said, setting another log on the stump. "My uncle ran cattle outside of Bozeman. Didn't care much for idleness." "Was he kind to you?" she asked, tone unreadable. Merritt paused, set the axe down slowly. "He wasn't cruel, but he taught hard lessons. Said life won't hand you comfort, you earn it or you don't get it at all." Evelyn nodded once and looked toward the ridge where the trees clung to the last of their gold. "You ever think about leaving here?" he asked after a moment. "I did once," she said. "Before Papa passed. Thought about heading east to find my mother's people in Ohio. But the train fare was more than I could gather, and I didn't want to leave the land he built." Merritt picked up the axe again but didn't swing. "You ever wonder what your life might have been if you had?" She met his eyes. "No. Wondering don't change what is." He gave a short nod, as if filing her answer away. That afternoon, Tessa helped grind corn while Tobias checked the traps Merritt had set along the tree line. Evelyn worked the wool shearing comb through the goats' coats, her hands sure, her breath visible in the cooling air. Merritt repaired the porch rail, pausing once to stretch his back. "You always this quiet when you work?" Evelyn asked. He glanced over his shoulder. No one ever cared to listen before. She watched him a moment. "I'm listening." He set the hammer down, moved to sit on the edge of the porch, elbows on his knees. "I rode with a cattle drive when I was 19, up from Texas through New Mexico and into Colorado. Lost a man to fever, buried another after a storm caved in the riverbank. After that, I stopped waiting for life to feel fair." She lowered her hands, the wool forgotten. "And still you're kind." "I don't see much use in being anything else," he said. Later that week, Tobias came down with fever. Evelyn stayed at his side through the night, spooning broth into his mouth and mopping his brow with vinegar water. Merritt kept the fire going and carried buckets from the spring without being asked. On the third night, Tobias slept deeper. Evelyn slumped beside the bed, her face gray with exhaustion. "You should lie down," Merritt said quietly. She shook her head. "I close my eyes, I'll miss something." He knelt beside her. "You've done all you can. Let me watch him a while." Her fingers gripped the edge of the quilt. "If he worsens." "He won't," Merritt said. "He's strong like his keeper." She studied him in the dim firelight, her face unreadable. Then she rose and stepped outside into the night air. Merritt sat beside Tobias, eyes on the boy's pale face. Outside, Evelyn leaned against the porch post and looked up at the stars. The cold bit at her cheeks. She didn't cry, but something inside her shifted. At dawn, she woke to find Merritt asleep in the chair, Tobias still breathing slow and steady. She touched Merritt's shoulder. "You stayed," she said. His eyes opened. "Didn't I say I would?" She nodded once and stepped into the kitchen. By the end of October, Tobias had fully recovered. He and Tessa ran laughing through the pasture, the goat trailing behind them like a dog. Evelyn watched from the garden, hands braced on her knees, a faint smile pulling at her mouth. Merritt came up behind her, holding a jar of honey he'd traded for in town. "Children look different when they're safe," he said. Evelyn stood, brushing her skirt off. "They're starting to dream again." Merritt handed her the jar. "And you," she didn't answer right away. Then, "I'm not used to dreaming." He stepped closer. "Maybe you just needed someone to hold the dream with you." The wind stirred her braid, and she looked up at him, something unguarded in her eyes. "You mean to stay?" she asked. "As long as you'll have me." Her throat worked around the words. "I don't know how to do this." "I don't need perfect," he said, "just honest." She reached out, fingers brushing his wrist. "I can try." His hand covered hers, warm and steady. "You already are." The first snow came quiet and early, just a dusting that melted by noon, but it sent the geese flying and turned the mornings raw. Evelyn noticed the way Merritt's horse had started limping down from the ridge and told him so. "Stone bruise," he said, crouched in the barn near the gelding's hoof. "I can get her through the winter, but come spring I'll need to trade for a sturdier mount." Evelyn knelt beside him, the hem of her skirt catching straw. "You planning to be here in spring?" He didn't look up. "I wouldn't ask a man to trade for a future he didn't mean to keep." She sat back on her heels, eyes on the horse's flank. "You haven't asked." "I didn't want to press you," he said. "You've had your hands full." She stood, brushing hay from her palms. "You think I don't see what you've done for me? For them? I didn't do it to be seen." "I know." She turned toward the open barn door. "That's why it matters." She left before he could answer, but her voice stayed in his chest long after the wind carried her footsteps away. By mid-November, the nights grew longer, and the stove burned hotter. Tobias took to carving small animals from scrap wood, leaving them in unexpected places: the windowsill, Evelyn's pillow, even once inside Merritt's boot. Tessa had taken to crawling into Merritt's lap by the hearth, falling asleep before supper was done. One evening, Evelyn found him there, still holding her, the firelight catching in the lines around his mouth. He looked up when she entered but said nothing. She crouched beside them, resting her hand on Tessa's blanket. "She gets attached easy." "She's got reason to," he said. "You've made her feel safe." "She didn't used to speak much," Evelyn murmured. "Now she sings to the goats." He smiled, faint and quiet. "She sings to me too." Evelyn watched the sleeping child a moment longer, then rose. "Come with me." He followed her out into the yard, where the moonlight silvered the frost on the grass. She stopped by the fence, arms folded against the cold. "I haven't told anyone this," she said, eyes fixed on the hills. "But I think I'm scared of peace. I've lived so long expecting something to go wrong. When it doesn't, I start looking for the crack." Merritt stood beside her, not touching, not crowding. "And now?" he asked. "I can't find the crack," she said, "and that terrifies me more than anything." He leaned his forearms on the rail. "I reckon when you've fought to survive, resting can feel like surrender." She didn't answer, but her breath hitched sharp in the cold. "I'm not asking you to lay down your guard," he said. "Just maybe lean on someone when the weight gets too much." She turned to him, moonlight catching the edge of her cheek. "You think I know how to do that?" "Not yet," he said. "But I can carry what you hand me." She stared at him a long time, then stepped closer, their arms brushing. After a moment, her gloved fingers found his. He squeezed gently once. Winter deepened, slow and steady. The creek froze clean through, and Merritt built a covered pen to keep the goats from wandering too far. Evelyn started rising earlier, putting coffee on before the sky turned pale. Without speaking of it, they began to move together through the days, splitting firewood, patching quilts, keeping the children well and warm. One night, Tessa woke coughing hard. Evelyn sat up fast, but Merritt was already pulling his boots on. She met him in the main room, both of them moving toward the girl in silence. He wrapped her in a shawl while Evelyn stirred the kettle. They didn't speak until the child slept again, curled between them on the mattress. Afterward, Evelyn stood at the sink, staring out at the snow-blanketed yard. Merritt came up behind her, not touching, just waiting. "She's all right," he said softly. Evelyn nodded. "When I was little, I used to dream of being someone's safe place. I thought maybe that meant being a mother or a wife. But after my father died, I stopped believing I could be either." Merritt's voice was low. "You've been both since the day you brought them in from the canyon." She turned, eyes clear. "And what about you? What did you dream of?" He hesitated. "A place I didn't have to leave." She stepped closer. "You still looking for it?" "I think I found it," he said, "but I'm waiting for it to ask me to stay." Her hand came up to the collar of his coat, her fingers light against the wool. "Then stay," she said, "if you want to." His breath left him slow. "I do." She leaned in then, not rushed, not nervous, just sure. Her lips found his, warm and certain, and when she pulled away, her hand stayed on his chest. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Outside, the snow began falling again, soft and slow, settling over everything like a promise kept. By the time December settled in, the light came late and left early, brushing the hills with a faint blue before vanishing into dusk. Evelyn had taken to lighting the lanterns before supper, and Merritt carved a second hook near the door so her coat wouldn't hang alone anymore. No one spoke of what that meant, but everyone noticed. He had moved his things into the small lean-to off the kitchen, the space her father once used for drying pelts. It wasn't much, but Merritt never asked for more. He spent most evenings inside anyway, helping Tobias shape the rails for the goat pen, or reading aloud from the worn almanac while Tessa curled against his side, thumb in her mouth. One morning, Evelyn found him washing his hands in snowmelt beside the trough, sleeves rolled high, steam rising from the bucket. She brought out a clean towel without a word. He took it from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. "I'm thinking of building a smokehouse," he said. "We'll need it come spring if we're planning to keep meat through next winter." "We are, then?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "I am." She looked away toward the faint line of chimney smoke drifting from the neighbor's place a mile off. "You ever miss the trail?" "Sometimes," he said. "But missing a thing don't mean you belong to it." Her throat tightened. "I thought I belonged to silence, to being left be, but now, it's not quiet that fills this place anymore." Merritt set the towel down on the fence post. "You ever think you were waiting for something?" She nodded slowly. "And I didn't know it until it showed up with dust on its boots and a quiet way of asking nothing but staying anyway." He smiled at that, soft and full. Snow began to fall in earnest by the second week of the month, thick flakes drifting down without hurry. Evelyn started using the quilts her mother had left behind, the ones she'd kept folded in the trunk for years. Tessa insisted on the one with yellow stars, and Tobias claimed the faded red that smelled faintly of cedar. One afternoon, Merritt took Tobias out to cut pine boughs, saying the cabin could use some green. They brought back armfuls, and Evelyn helped them weave garlands along the mantel and windows. Tessa strung dried cranberries with clumsy fingers, and when she dropped the needle, Merritt held her little hand and helped her thread it again. That night, Evelyn stood at the window after the children were asleep, watching the snow gather on the rail. Merritt came to stand beside her, his shirt open at the wrist, the firelight brushing his jaw. "You ever have a Christmas tree?" he asked. She shook her head. "Papa said we didn't need one, said the land was enough reminder of blessings." "That's true," Merritt said. "But I figure there's no harm in bringing in a bit of green to remind us what lives through the cold." She turned toward him. "You want to cut one?" He met her gaze. "I want to cut one with you." They bundled up the next morning and took the sled out past the ridge. Merritt carried the saw, and Evelyn pointed out a tree she said reminded her of Tessa, small, stubborn, and holding fast even under snow. They cut it together, the scent of sap sweet and sharp in the air, and dragged it home with Tobias riding the back like a king. They set it near the hearth. Evelyn tied ribbons from old dress hems, and Merritt hung small carved birds he'd shaped from firewood scraps. Tessa added a button from her coat. It wasn't fancy, but it filled the room with something warm and full. That evening, Evelyn laid her hand on Merritt's arm while he fed the fire. "You've given them more than I ever knew how to," she said, "and you never asked for anything." He turned toward her, the orange light catching in his eyes. "I didn't come here to take. I came hoping there might be enough space in your heart for me to belong." "There is," she said, voice quiet but sure. "I didn't know it until now, but there is." He stepped closer. "Then let me stay, Evie. Let me make this home ours." She reached up, fingers resting at the base of his neck. "You already have." He kissed her, then no hurry. Just the steady kind of promise that says I'm here, and I'll be here tomorrow too. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, the fire burned slow and bright, and the cabin held its warmth like it had been waiting all this time for just this kind of love. The snow on the roof held through the turning of the year, heavy and white, sagging the eaves until Merritt braced them with cedar poles. Evelyn patched the chimney, flashing with pitch and canvas. Sleeves rolled and cheeks red from the wind, while Tobias watched from the ladder's bottom rung, a length of twine looped around his wrist like it meant something. It was the kind of cold that bit through wool and made the world quiet except for the creak of trees and the low groan of the wind against the valley. Inside, The cabin stayed warm. Merritt had built a heat shelf above the stove for drying boots and mittens, and Evelyn's hands had grown used to the smell of smoke in the wool. Tessa had taken to humming while she sorted seed sacks, and Tobias started keeping a tally of eggs in a ledger Merritt carved from scrap pine. The pages were rough, but the boy wrote careful and straight, his numbers clean. Merritt found Evelyn one evening in the root cellar, checking the last of the carrots for rot. She held one up against the lantern light, twisting it slow in her palm. "You think we'll make it through the last stretch?" she asked, her voice low. Merritt stepped down the last rung and picked up a sack. "We've got enough. Not plenty, but enough." She set the carrot aside and wiped her hands on her apron. "I was never good at trusting a stretch of stillness. Always waiting for something to give." He took her hand before it could fall back to her side. "It doesn't have to be earned with hardship to be real." She looked at him fully. "What if I only know how to hold things that hurt? Then I'll teach you how to hold what doesn't," he said. She nodded once, sharp and sure, and they climbed the ladder back into the warmth. A thaw came slow. The first sign was the birds' high cries overhead and the sudden flit of wings near the barn rafters. Tobias spotted buds on the cottonwood, and Merritt started checking the fence posts for winter rot. He pulled Evelyn aside one morning, hands still dirty from clearing the creek path. "There's a man in town," he said. "Name's Carlo, running cattle too close to our west line. I came across a cut fence and signs of trampling." She narrowed her eyes. "You think he's testing the line?" "I know he is." She pulled her coat on without another word. They rode out together, Tobias left in charge of Tessa with clear instruction. The land west was gray and brittle, the ground still hard underfoot. They found the fence where Merritt said posts splintered, wire slack, hoofprints pressed deep into the thawing dirt. Evelyn crouched near the path. "These weren't strays." Merritt nodded. "I counted 17 head. Drove them straight through." She stood and brushed her knees. "We speak to him. Calm, direct. If he pushes, we go to the association." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to handle it that way?" "I don't shoot unless I have to." Carlo's place was 3 miles north, a lean house with a sagging porch and a scatter of lean cattle. He stood out front when they rode up, arms folded, eyes sharp under a brim that had seen better years. "You've got cattle on our land," Evelyn said before he could speak. Carlo looked her over, then Merritt. "Land's open range till spring thaw." "Not when it's fenced," she said. He spat toward the post. "Fence don't mean much without a brand." Merritt dismounted, slow and calm. "That fence stands on deeded land. You cross it again, we bring the marshal." Carlo looked at Evelyn. "You always send your man to speak for you." "He's not speaking for me," she said. "He's standing with me. You cross that line again and you'll find both of us waiting." Carlo didn't answer, just turned and walked back inside. They rode home in silence, the sun dipping low. At the gate, Evelyn stopped her horse and looked over at Merritt. "You didn't question me once." He shrugged. "Didn't see a reason to." She held his gaze. "Then I suppose I ought to stop questioning myself." By March's end, the thaw was full. The creek ran quick and cold, and the goats dropped their kids in the straw with little fuss. Tobias helped build a new pen for the youngest, and Tessa named each one with the solemnity of a preacher: Juniper, Birch, Clover, and the rest. One morning, Evelyn found Merritt in the barn loft fixing the hay chute. She climbed the ladder and sat beside him, legs swinging over the edge. "I want to marry you," she said. He blinked. "That's so." "I don't need a preacher," she said, "or a paper. I just need to say it where it matters." Merritt set down the hammer. "Say it then." "I want you beside me," she said, "for every morning, every fence post, every winter. I want to build a life with you that don't lean on fear, one that stands because we made it so." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small ring carved from bone, smooth and pale. "I made it for you," he said. "Didn't know when to give it." She held out her hand. He slid it on and she leaned into him, not for balance, but because it was where she was meant to be. That night, they told the children. Tobias nodded once, serious and quiet, and Tessa crawled into Evelyn's lap and asked if she could wear flowers in her hair when the new days came. They married beneath the budding cottonwood, Merritt's coat brushed clean, Evelyn's braid tied with a strip of her mother's faded linen. Tobias stood beside them, tall and proud, and Tessa tossed dried petals in the wind like it was her purpose in life. They lived on that land for the rest of their days. The goats multiplied, and Merritt built a second cabin for the growing family. Tobias took to trapping, then to teaching, and Tessa became the first girl in Red Bluff to read before her 8th birthday. Evelyn never again doubted the stillness that came after the storm. She knew now that peace didn't mean forgetting pain, it meant building something stronger in its place. And Merritt never left. He rose before the sun, carved his marks into the wood of their home, and kissed Evelyn's cheek each night like it was the first time. They grew old with the land, with hands calloused by love and years and hearts bound quiet and deep, like roots under snow.